Office, Katie.
Let's bring in Congressman Mike Quigley. Congressman, thank you, first of all, for joining us. I know Congress is on recess. I want to ask you about the process here and how you believe...
The process is changing. On my way here, there were 3 stories breaking on
Yeah, of course.
On this.
Do you think that, I mean, tell us about what it's going to be like in these hearings. If Rudy Giuliani shows up for a hearing, is he going to be questioned by subsequent members of Congress? Or will there be a former prosecutor, a staff member, handling the questions the way we saw Corey Lewandowski handled just the other day?
Look, I think you've seen varied levels of success by members and by staffers. I do think there's a lot to be said for continuity of having one professional ask questions for a half hour or 45 minutes. But I've seen excellent questions come from members. If people put their egos aside and not ask a 3.5-minute speech and a 30-second question, we can do the job. So much of this is understanding.
Do you coordinate with each other behind the scenes when you, for the sequencing of questions? Do you coordinate how you're going to follow up? Is there a process, a plan?
Look, we've been doing this almost 3 years now, and I think there's been good coordination. I can only speak for my committee, the Intelligence Committee. And I think we've done a good job. When all the transcripts come out from the Russian investigation, I think most Americans will be proud of the job members did. It's a pretty good batting average. But I do think there has to be coordination to avoid duplication and to have a stream of consciousness. So you're telling a story when the American public is watching the hearing.
Will you be subpoenaing Mike Pompeo, not just the documents, but now that there's reporting from the Wall Street Journal that Mike Pompeo was on that Ukraine call, will you call him before your committee?
You know, we're living in real time. I believe that the Secretary will receive a subpoena. I'm not sure which committee and how it's going to be divided. I can tell you that this Friday, the Inspector General will be back before the House Select Committee on Intelligence. And then on Thursday, Mr. Volker will be before the staff of the Intelligence Committee. You've seen the subpoenas going forward. This is the first time since I've been in Congress, over 10 years, where the press is asking me questions. My constituents are asking me questions, and literally answers are being formulated as the questions are being asked. We're going to get there. We're going to do it on a coordinated basis.
The reporting is coming at a rapid pace. The news from the New York Times that Donald Trump asked Australia to look into the origins of the Mueller report at the request of his Attorney General. What's your reaction to that?
I think it's an argument for why impeachment needs to go forward. If you read the White House transcript, or wherever anyone wants to call it, talking about you in the conversations with Ukraine, he references the special counsel, Mr. Mueller. Right after it was released and the special counsel testified, the President of the United States went on to, I think, a greater crime. Right? So I think it's a message that the only way this president's going to be held accountable for his actions, and the special counsel detail what I think are extraordinary crimes, is if we are allowed to go forward and the courts understand the exigency of us and force these subpoenas, these documents, and these witnesses to testify truthfully to Congress.
What happens if Rudy Giuliani says no, he's not going to come before your committee?
We are bound by the rules. How the strategy moves forward, going forward on a criminal basis, a civil basis. You know, I've heard people talk about bringing back inherent contempt. I think at this point, the House would be willing to go forward with inherent contempt, at least in terms of fining people. Can you define inherent
contempt for those out there who might not know exactly what it is?
It's one of the few pieces that the power that the House actually has. They used to have a jail across the street when people didn't obey a constitutional request or an order, they were allowed to be detained. In this case, we can actually fine. But again, for now, this is all virgin territory. None of us have ever been through this again. And I think it's going to involve leadership of the committees and of the House to work together to decide what is the best strategy. The other value of doing it, I think, is the American public now has a taste of the criminal wrongdoing of this administration. and they're paying more attention. Only 3% read the special counsel's report. A lot more watched his testimony, and a lot more are paying attention now as these news stories come out. I think it's harder and harder for the Republicans to back this administration in their obstruction, and I think it creates opportunities for additional articles. And courts don't live in a vacuum. They're going to be seeing this public pressure moving forward, too.
How quickly will you do this? Nancy Pelosi said expeditiously. Does that mean before Thanksgiving, before Christmas, New Year's?
So much of it depends on the president's next tweet or the next crime we hear about or how the courts act, how effective we are in our strategy, how much pressure comes from the American people. All I can tell you is we're not going to be the one that slows the process down.
Do you think it needs to happen before the primaries begin, or are you worried about it getting in the way of the 2020 Democrats being able to focus solely on policy?
Look, we won the House back on policy. We won the House back on health care. But I think the American public has seen us do more than one thing at a time. We're passing legislation every week dealing from pharmaceutical pricing to climate change to gun violence. The fact that the Senate is killing that legislation isn't our problem right now. We're going to go forward and do both things.
What about the whistleblower? Chairman Schiff says he has, or the whistleblower, he or she has agreed to testify very soon. Anything more you can tell us about that?
I don't think it's a question of whether. I think it's a question of when and how. Given this extraordinary series of threats I think the president has laid out, in an extremely dangerous situation.
Do you think the president is threatening violence against the whistleblower?
I think it's more an incitement, right? He talks about treason and traitors and what we used to do with those kind of people. It's not hard for people to figure out what he's talking about. And he's telling his base that he sees this person as a real threat. At some point in time, he needs to recognize just exactly what he's doing. This is an assault on the whistleblowing community and a threat to the intel community. In a democracy, we live with an intelligence community that operates in secret. That only works if there's congressional oversight and whistleblowers. Without that, wrongdoing goes unpunished, unknown, frankly, and it also creates leaks. Both of those are bad for our national security.
Congressman